So hair can be very tricky for people to draw because I feel like it might be almost instinctual for people to draw hair with like individual strands like that, which we want to avoid. Hair has form and you want to group hair together into big, bold shapes and then have an implied sense of detailed. And so what I mean by that is we're going to look at some examples from the show Frieren on how they sort of add or implied detail through shadows. The main thesis is sort of using shadow to help give off more form, to help imply more form to the hair and to imply the strands. So if we look over here, she has a big shape for the hair, right? You want to first capture the big overall shape, which is very round, very poofy with a little bit of detail on the bottom here. And the idea of it is that you need to first capture form. Right, you first need to make sure that the overall simple silhouette is strong, which is the big primary shape. So we want to focus on primary shapes. And then after we have the primary shape down, then we can bring in the secondary and then the tertiary shapes, going from big ideas to the smaller and smaller ideas. So if we look over here, the big primary shape is this big round bob that goes into the smaller little strands here. And then you have big ideas of curves like this. Now these, I would say, would be leaning towards the secondary shapes now because we're adding in more detail to the big main shape. And so these are going to be the big main strands that you see here with the black lines like that going down. And you'll see that as for the lines only, it's very simplified. You have your big main shapes and then you have a few black lines to help capture just a little bit more detail and sell the idea of the strands. So you can put in like a few like that, but you're not overwhelming it where it's like, you know, like a million lines going in like this, right? We're not doing this. Now, to get to the crux of the main thing is I'm going to be using just a blue to indicate shadow. You can have your main form simplified out like this and you can call it done, but you can add in more detail. So you can see here that the use of shadow is to help add more detail, more the illusion of individual strands to the form. And I'm looking at this now. I could probably make the back of this head fatter. So let's draw out the shadow shape with the blue. So we have a little bit of implied form in the shadows. And you can see how the shadows are sort of wrapping around the form to help build out. So we have it like this. And then you can see here, there's no like actual line art of the strand here, but the shadow helps sell the form idea. It's a lot more easier to do digitally, but the idea is still the same, where you're following the ideas of the strands. Now here, I didn't draw exactly the same, so I'm just gonna make it up like that. Why not? Boom, right? There's these forms here, so I wanna simplify it down, bring in and group the shadows the same. There's a little bit of shadow up here. And so now you can kind of see that there's this, I'm creating these layers of hair strands, even though that it's not an actual, I'm not actually drawing each individual strand. Yes. And then also grouping shadows too. So the idea with hair is very counterintuitive. Even though hair is so thin and strandy, you want to always be thinking of how you can group it together and how you can kind of push and simplify the forms as much as possible, because that's what creates the most, like the maximum appeal. And you can also see how the highlights are also selling this idea of the form. They give off the impression that there's little bits of strands like this, simplifying it out like that, right? And this all helps sell the idea that there's a bunch of strands that you can't really see being slid down. And that's also how our eyes work too when we look at real life, because in real life when we're looking at someone, we're not looking at their individual hairs. We might see a little bit of a hair strand like flying out like this, right? And this was also conveyed through like animation and stuff as well. But the main thing is we're looking at the overall shape of the whole thing. So always think in shapes. We have this next idea over here, and I'm just going to be focusing on this one strand right here. You can kind of see how it's so simple. The lines, there's barely any lines, it's just conveying the shape. You can see that there's a shadow here to help sell the more detailed forms. But I'm looking over here, you want to have this idea right here. Using shadow to create extra strands that aren't there. Because if we look at this form, right, I have the form right here. It's basically just like a ribbon, right, that's flat like that. And then you can have maybe like one line going down for that strand. You can have a shadow here. That's what the shadow there is for. Shade that in. And then we see there's this big shadow here because this form is rounded. So that means, you know, whatever is not facing the light is going to be in shadow. And then you can just add in the little bit of implied strand right here, like that. And that can help give off the impression that there is more to this hair, there's more detail to this hair than there is, and that's actually drawn, and then you're set. And this is what I mean by focusing on the big shapes. It's very much like you have a head, and then you have these big like cylinder tubes coming down like this, right? It's very, very simplified because they're all tied into these little braids right here. Makes it easy to draw, but it also gives off a more appealing shape that's very easy to understand and see, right? So you have all of these different tubes coming out like this, but then you'll see that in the light and the shadow, even some of the shadows are simplified, right? They just be these loops and curves to help sell the simplification of everything. But then you'll also have shadows that convey the strands as well. So then we have this one here that conveys it like this, slides it back like this, boom, right, boom, like that. And that helps sell the strands. If we look over on this side, there's a similar idea here, and I can just exaggerate it for my version, right? All right, and all of that would be in shadow. So a lot of shading too is about memorizing the shapes and appealing shapes. And so once you've done a few studies of these, then in your own drawings, you'll be able to easily just have it almost like muscle memory, where you have hair strands and then you're just, okay, yeah, so the shadow is going to be like this of a shadow, and then doing this and that. So a lot of that becomes intuitive at a point. I have a few more. This one here, the idea is the same. So we have this sort of big shape coming out like this. You have another shape coming out like this, and then you can have a little bit of actual line to help indicate the flow of the form, but then the majority of it can be carried by the shadows, by sort of helping to illustrate the forms like this. So in using the primary, secondary, tertiary verbiage, the big primary shape would be this main sort of sphere, oval, oblong thing. And then you'll have little secondary shapes using here to help create the flow and the big strands. And then you'll use the shadow to help create the tertiary shapes, the smaller strands. So you can see here, I have the figure, the head, the main primary shapes. You have the shape of this going down like that. You have this shape going down like this, right? You have all of these main shapes. And then you have a little bit of secondary shapes to help, you know, add more detail to the form. And so now let's add in the shadows. The shadows can help definitely elevate and add implied detail to the form. And you can see how even the shadows aren't capturing like the itty bitty details. The shadows are also really big sort of shapes. So by having a bunch of, you know, big shapes of different types together, it creates this illusion of form. And it also helps out that we have these highlights here that also help sell the idea. And this is the last one. It's the same idea. This shadow shape right here is really, really subtle, but it helps give off the impression. A lot of this stuff is trying to push the impression of things, the illusion of detail, that there's no lines to indicate the shadow, right? The lines are very, very simplified, but then you can have your shadows add the extra bit of detail. So that's the idea. We want to make sure that we have this hierarchy in mind: primary, secondary, tertiary, the hair drawn in big shapes with, you know, a little bit of a ribbon idea, right? Making sure that there is still perspective and form to them depending on the hair, right? If the hair is bunched up, right? Making sure that there's these forms being added to it. And then you can have in a little bit of line to help create some of the secondary details and to help sell the direction of the strands, but keep them, you know, sparingly. But also you can notice that keep them near the edges of the form. And then, this is the main part, is that to use your lighting, use your shadows shapes, use your highlight shapes to help sell more of this form idea like this. So it's honestly really simple. And it's just, you know, it's just one main concept that I'm trying to get across. But it's a good concept to have in your head. And hopefully it can, you know, enlighten some people. So that is going to be the main idea.